Thank you for watching our Transformational Shorts block. I'm Rick Hamilton, Managing Director here at The Chain, and now I'd like to invite you to stick around and listen to the talkbacks with some of our filmmakers. And we are here with After the Flood, director, filmmaker, ALEXANDRA GUILLOSSOU. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
And you actually have two films in our film festival, both short docs.
Yes, the other one is called The Deepest Cut, and that one is a personal story.
And it is an excellent film. You should look out for it. I believe it's actually playing in the short docs block, but look that up on our film guide because it's a wonderful film. But onto the film that they have actually seen, The Flood. So this is, I want to talk about process almost as much as anything. This is like such a prime example of classic Russian montage editing to put two totally different things together the way that you have. I think you started working on one and then developed the other. Is that true?
Yes, exactly. This started out as, it was supposed to be a type of film that was about river cleanup. And during the course of the spring, St. Louis got hit with all of the rain, and the flood ended up being, I think, the second worst since that one in '93. And I couldn't do river cleanup, but I thought it'd be great to document the flood. And my husband had told me, he said, well, people aren't going to get it. They're not going to really understand unless you give them some context. Well, it just so happened that the Blues had won their first ever national championship. He's like, everybody's going to understand that. And I was like, really? I mean, I don't really watch hockey myself, but okay, fine. And I absolutely didn't want to do it. I dreaded it. I didn't, like the whole idea of packing myself on the Metrolink and with all my, like my gimbal and my mobile phone and going down there. I was just like, oh, but I did it. And it was so fascinating. It really was. Like, as soon as I was there and I was starting to, film, and you become almost a different person, the observer. And it was just, I couldn't get enough of it. And it was great to see the interaction with the fans, because they're there to see the hockey players, but then they saw me, and they like the way they participated and the way they just, played a role in the story was fantastic. And so then as I was doing that, I found a correlation between the two. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can actually do something with this. Now, the problem with that is that with a flood and with, a parade celebration, you have one take. I mean, there's no going back.
Right.
So I had to desperately hope that, not only was I getting the shots that I wanted, but I was actually getting shots, because sometimes, you hit the record button and it doesn't work. Or the other times that you hit the record button and the color is just completely like, you never set the color because you just forgot. I was just like, oh my gosh, I just can't, the nervousness was just unbelievable. But yeah, somehow through it all, I had almost as much footage as I wanted to make the piece, so that was good.
But did you have any concept at the time of how they were going to go together at that point? When you were actually filming the crowd from the Blues, were you able to go back into your head about what you had done before to try to find anything, or were you just
Yeah, I think when I started, it had to do with the fact that there were so many people, and I thought, well, okay, I can do the correlation between lots of water versus lots of people. And, is there a dichotomy about that? Is there similarity? What is that? But it was as I was filming and sort of seeing the effects of when you have, 500,000, I think it was, people all in one space, like what that does to, quote, the environment, like what a river does when it overflows. So in the middle of that, I went, wow, there's really something powerful here that I can use. So that as I was sort of in the middle of doing the crowd, that's when I started focusing on that other aspect. So I was like, oh, so then I made my husband take me downtown really early the next morning so I could see the cleanup, because I knew they had to clean it up really fast. I was like, I have to film the cleanup. And the only part that I had to add that was, directed was my daughter doing her own cleanup on the edge of the river.
Now that you got the footage, how long did it take you to assemble all of the pieces, and how much back and forth? At what point did you finally have to step away and say, this is what I'm going for? I know just editing a linear piece is hard enough. As you're putting together a story just with pictures, what's that like?
Yeah, this one was extra challenging, because usually when I walk into a film, I have a pretty concrete idea of what I want to do. And this one, was taking these two things, and I basically had to spend some time, it was probably a day or two, just going through all of the flood footage and then all of the crowd footage and trying to find chunks that were similar to one another. And so then just sort of actually it wasn't even in my mind. When I work in Premiere, I usually, when I put the files in, I actually put them in as I think they're going to sequence as I'm editing, which might not be the way a lot of people work. I tend to not do that whole timetable thing and that whole, I mean, I am pretty organized when I label, but that I think for maybe doing something like a fiction, some sort of narrative where you really have the story written out, you can sort of do that more. But when it's documentary work, and especially like this one that I did, the after the flood one, you just don't know until you're really looking at it at the time and making those comparisons. And so I would pull things over as I thought they worked together in chunks. And I usually base a lot of what I do on the music. And that just naturally, I think that naturally happens because I was a professional dancer. And so almost everything I do kind of is always based upon what that music is in the background. And it could be ambient, it could be just sounds, it could be someone reading, but there has to be some type of rhythm, some type of beat, something that helps drive how I put that story together. Yeah, and so it was kind of sort of a combination of those two things that helped me edit it. Like I said, it was a little tough. It didn't take me a long time. It probably took me about a week, but I did start it, and then I put it down. I put it away for probably 2 months, and then picked it up again, because I started it and I thought, God, I'm just not going to be able, this isn't going to work. I was like, it's just not going to work. So I was like, and then later on I said, I put all this time and effort into it. Let me look at it again. And sure enough, when I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, there's really something here. Okay, so let me see what I have. And
yeah, it can be illuminating to step away from it for that long.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely helped me. So
that's very smart.
Yeah. My process really doesn't work with, I didn't go to school or anything, so I don't follow any of those steps or anything that people talk about. It's all kind of based on feeling. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but it's the way I sort of do it.
Intuition filmmaking or intuition editing. It's it's fantastic. Do you focus mostly on docs, or do you do other pieces as well?
Right now, just because it's a lot easier. I get really, it's easy to get enthusiastic about it and then just to immediately dive into it. Mm-hmm. I do have a few narrative pieces that I want to do that I've actually, written them out and, wrote down like, how I want the cameras and, where I want the person, the setting, all this stuff. But now it's actually, that one's a little harder, because then I had to coordinate the people, and, then no one's really ready, or we missed the fall. So now I was like, okay, should I do it in the winter? And then, and it just, for some reason, it's a harder thing to get going than, a documentary. The story is there, the story is fascinating. And then I just like start filming, and then I, if it's a person, I kind of start asking later, like, hey, I've been filming this, what do you think? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, let's do it. And then I finish it up, and then
that's amazing.
Yeah. Again, it might not be the best way of going about it, but they do say yes. They do give me permission. So.
That's great. Well, thank you again for sharing this piece with us, and also again, check out The Deepest Cut, because it's a very special film. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And now we have here with us the filmmakers from Phosphene. Very exciting. Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rick. So my name is Brian Ribeiro. I'm the writer, director, and editor, as well as animator for short film Phosphene, which is about two artists going down the trippy world of drugs and how that interrelates with their creative outlets.
I'm Patrick Schechter. I was the cinematographer on the film.
And my name is Stephanie De Jesus, and I did the storyboards.
Which is awesome, because this is such a visual film. I'm glad we actually have all these sort of different aspects about it. So let's start at the very beginning. So at what point, Brian, did you start working with? Actually, I guess it could be all three of you. At what point did story turn into visuals, turn into drawing them out, turn into getting them on camera?
Right. So I guess the initial birthing point for the film was a lot of anime, actually. So I'm a big nerd. Oh. So the medium of anime itself is incredibly visual, and the story is what really.
Steph, you nodded a little too hard when he said he was a big nerd. I just.
Oh yeah.
If anybody did not see that, I just needed to point it out.
110%, man. Thank you. That breaks the ice. So the story dealt with a bunch of like high school kids with powers and stuff. And I had so the idea was just stating, but trying to treat the powers in more relation with their insecurities. So I try to figure out what is the most insecure demographic of people. Well, that's artists, pretty much. So I had known Steph since, oh my God, I don't even know how long, like let's say 5-6 years. And we started out as friends, and then she moved away from New York, unfortunately, and we kept in contact. And she was always a very talented illustrator. So I had always wanted to work with her. And Pat was somebody I worked really quickly on a weird Craigslist gig.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. And we kept in touch. We had similar philosophies, similar outlooks, similar senses of humor. And I wanted to work with him as well. And it just sort of all kind of coalesced from there.
Great. So what were the discussions like with Steph of putting it on paper?
Yeah, I'll definitely defer to Steph for that one. Yeah, put her on the spot for once. Hold on.
Oh yes, of course. I probably deserve it after earlier. So he knows that I really do like the idea of doing storyboarding, possibly as a full-time gig sometime in the future. And I hadn't had a lot of opportunities to work with anybody on any sort of like big projects or anything. For the most part, what I had learned was either from, what I did in school or, just kind of messing around on my own. And he had approached me with the idea of possibly doing storyboards for his film project. And I really wanted the experience, and I know that he is able to commit. He's worked on several projects before, so I knew that he would be a reliable person to work for. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. You're going to have to walk me through it, because it's going to be my first actual stab at this. And he kind of walked me through it, and it worked out really well. I think it was a really fun, man, we worked on the storyboards for like a year or so. That was,
yeah, there was at least 2 drafts with a complete change in story, and she was patient enough with my stupid ass to go throughout the whole experience and make it so much better, honestly, because then we were able to figure out character motivations through the story, through the storyboards, and seeing how characters would emote in these situations. So it was a way of visualizing the script. That's what a storyboard is, but really trying to bring these characters to flesh before you even cast, and then influence that as well. Coincidentally, I had never worked with somebody else on a storyboard. Usually I've done stick figures, so it was someone else's interpretation in front of me, and it was a good, humbling experience in that way.
And then Pat, at what point did you come in were you in conversations along any of this journey, or were you just then looking at what Brian and Steph had come together with?
Yeah, of course. We had discussions beforehand, referred heavily to the storyboard, but I mean, as all of us know, once you get on location, it's sort of about figuring out the balance between the storyboard and what's available.
Who came up with sort of the she's got some really nice, cool, almost watery colors. He's got that fire burning warmth. Was that into the storyboards there, or did that come out of lighting and on set, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely like what Brian sort of like pitched to me, kind of like what he wanted from the lighting scheme. And yeah, we just kind of made it happen and worked with what we had.
Nice. Was
Yeah.
that part then of your sort of concept?
Yeah, I mean, I was working with some visual distinct. I was thinking of some visual languages that were distinct to each character, and the idea was tossed with Steph at the beginning, and then started getting more fleshed out with Pat as we worked with a lighting guy to try and give it some actual like character and stuff. I remember in one particular scene we shot in the basement in Brooklyn. Driving there was a pain in the ass, but we were trying to figure out how this color scheme could then be influenced into her visual distinctness, because whenever she gets into these, so her version of a power is that she can read minds conceptually, not very specifically, and the idea of blue being tonal and feeling subterranean, feeling like an echo. These were all ideas I was playing with, but try to still keep it abstract and non-specific, so that at least some of the audience members can pull away some of their own imprints of what that could be and stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. When and then after it's all put together, then it circles back then around to you, Brian, for you did the digital effects and the artistry afterwards.
Yeah. So I do video editing as a job, but I also do motion graphics and animation. I'm not the most experienced in it, but what I was doing was enough to get me by with this. So I was lucky enough to be through the pipeline of the whole thing. Whereas like Steph represents the pre-production and Pat represents the production, I represent the post-production, and seeing that vision through was something I was fairly adamant about, but also gave myself enough time to play with. There were times I've sent versions of the film to Pat, to Steph, and then try to get their input on and stuff like that, because they have a retroactive type of knowledge that I thought that could have really helped and was curious about and stuff.
I think that's a really important thing to do, and I feel like Brian and I sort of developed that relationship where like we kind of just share whatever content we make with each other and critique it after the fact, and like try to get our edits the best they possibly could be.
Yeah, definitely.
How much did the film change during each of the cycles? You talked about it kind of going through different drafts in pre-production, working with Steph. Did it wind up kind of developing in different ways, either during production and or post?
Yeah, actually there was, there were characters that were even dropped from the final concept. I think there was like a sister involved. remember that? I drew that. I had drawn her and everything.
I don't remember nothing.
And that's okay. That's just part of the process. Like Brian's like, we're not even gonna do this right now, or the place is gonna change, or like, visually it's gonna, and that's just part of the process. I was totally on board with anything. Like, if things need to get dropped or need to get added, I just wanted to see how it was gonna look. Like you gotta make changes so the pacing works real nicely. And I'm actually pretty happy with how the final product came out. I feel like it was a lot more clear. Like I don't think there needed to be like a sister to just give give.
Exposition kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
something like that.
yeah, each of the characters just kind of brought out them. Having a hard time finding the words and like making it happen. They were able to bring out the story in themselves without a lot of having to lean on other characters, I think.
Ooh, that's
Yeah.
a nice way to phrase that. If
Yeah.
I would edit out everything first and let you come up with that like you're really smart, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, totally. And like jumping around, and they're like, "What's happening with her? Is she good?" It's like, yeah, no, I just
because Steph comes from a webcomics background, so this was a huge transition for her. The film world is something she's dipping her toes into, and hopefully she likes it. Hopefully this isn't too stressful. But there's something to be said of someone's intimate knowledge of a different medium inside of illustration transitioning into storyboarding. There was something that Pat complimented really quickly, and I think I've told this to Steph already, where it was like, oh wow, these characters are incredibly emotive and expressive. I wish I could pull out one right now. All I have is a Phosphene poster, but I don't have any of the storyboards.
That's totally fine. Well, thank you. Yeah, no, visual storytelling through storyboards or comics, they're very similar. Of course, they're
The comics are kind of storyboards.
yeah, they're pretty much just fleshed out storyboards, and I have made a few comics back in the day. I'm actually working on one right now. I'm not trying to plug or anything, but
Go away.
there are definitely similarities between storyboarding and making comics, and I felt like that made working with Brian on the storyboards a lot easier than if I just jumped right in without that knowledge.
And I do think, kind of coming off of some of that, what you were going with is there are some things that are not specifically spelled out, which allows the viewer to kind of put their own interpretation on this film, which is the kind of film that I really like. And for me, you were talking about insecurities of artists, and I was kind of seeing a lot of blocked artistry, although maybe that's 2020 talking to me.
Motivation, yeah.
And then really how they both thrived with connection, that they were trying to find their own stimulus that wasn't working for them, but actually finally being brought together again really is what kind of lashes out both their creativities and fulfillment.
That's incredible, Rick. Hearing you talk about my film is just giving me a huge ego boost. Thank you, man. I think most people have some level of creative outlet, whether it's drawing, camera work. It can go down to sports. Everyone has their own outlet to take things out on, to channel their frustrations out through. And I think all of us try and find that connection. A lot of us have been lucky enough to find that very early. What I think I wanted to do is show that sometimes you can communicate your issues not through just verbiage, but maybe there's something else that you can do through that. But that's as specific as I think I want to get.
Yeah, that was nice. Seriously, plug away. Where can we find any of your work, Steph, Pat, Brian?
Okay, yeah. My Instagram is VHS Ultra. I have lots of other content on there, and I hope you guys check it out.
Awesome.
I have an Instagram if you want to just check out my art. It's at StephoDoodles. You can also find me on Twitter at StephoDoodles. I am also working on a comic called House of Cards. You can find that on comicborder.info if you're curious about that. I'm only about 8 pages in, but I'm hoping to continue working on that project in the meantime. But if any other projects creep up along the way, hopefully I'll be working on those too.
Awesome. Brian?
My Instagram handle is Brian with a Y, Films 123. So Brian Films 123. I usually, it takes a while for me to make a new film. I'm already feeling exhausted thinking about the drafts that are in front of me right here. But hopefully you guys can check it out and join us on this crazy journey and stuff.
Awesome. Well, it's been great to have all of you. It's been a great conversation. This has been awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Rick.
Absolutely. And so now we have with us, with dull hope, Brian Ratigan. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Shane, Professor.
Absolutely. This is such an interesting piece. I'm almost not sure where to begin. I can't draw a box. So when I see somebody who can actually do relatively, I don't want to say they're simple, but they're, or they're not simplistic, but they're simple maybe. Like you can get a lot of expression out of just a few lines is really interesting. We got into longing and heartache, all from really not a lot there. What is your background in drawing?
No, not at all. I'm also not a great artist, which is why I use very simple line drawings for the film. My background is mainly motion graphics and compositing, animation, but I really love challenging myself. And because I'm not that great of an artist, I just sort of created this character, wanted to see what I could do with him, and it just sort of spiraled from there. Yeah.
What was the development like? So you seem to have, is it actually hand drawn? Is it computer? I know you've got found footage in there. It's a really interesting sort of multimedia.
Thank you. Yes, I everything that you see in the film is hand drawn on paper and then scanned, digitized, and brought into After Effects to comp it all together. There's the textured overlays, which are like paintings that I did, which I just sort of masked to the character. And then the found footage was a totally separate element. I went to an estate sale when I lived in Florida, and I got a bunch of this found footage. It was like 13 boxes or 13 reels in one box, and it just said Illinois 1957. And I thought that's very sad that someone would sell their memories, essentially. And so I went through the footage and I picked out things that I thought were very like touching moments, small moments within life, and just sort of put them into the film. I had animated the film before I knew which footage I was going to use.
Oh, interesting.
And so just kind of like randomly place it in and see if it worked, and it kind of did. So
Extremely well. But going into that then, like if it's hand drawn and scanned in, you obviously knew where you were going once you actually got on paper. As before you got to that stage, were you kind of developing different places to take this little character?
Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure. I thought that I would I was thinking about longing and about loss, and the whole film took like 2 years and just nights and weekends just animating, but I animated in loops. So a lot of things can be repeated. It's sort of like, you animate on twos, and you just sort of like have these things that you can move the camera digitally, but they're very, very rudimentary drawings. I wanted it to be sort of like a sense of longing, and then it sort of developed into like a purgatory of someone who is trapped in reliving their own memories, which in a sense we all are, I believe. If this year has proven anything, it's that you can't escape yourself, and for better or for worse, they could be good memories or they could be bad. But I felt the drawings were bad enough, so the footage needs to be light.
Again, I think they're very expressive, but also we remember things slightly more vividly than we can remember ourselves, because we ourselves can't, we don't always put ourselves into the memories. So
we also don't remember them as they occur. We remember our versions of them. And if you're being forced to look at, your own life, you're not seeing the picture that you created, you're seeing the reality of it. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And that no one would do this willingly. So the whole thing with the record player is him trying to change the tune, trying to, come to terms with it, even if he's having to rip out his own heart to do it.
Oh, nice. That's really great. And yet the record player itself is the cycle that we get trapped in. So
exactly.
It all kind of comes together. And then how did what was your relationship with working on the sound development and the score? Were you completely done and you passed it on to somebody? Did you work with somebody and kind of edit to some of that?
Yes, his name is Nick Punch, and a fantastic human being. And I gave him a short film and just told him, please make this better. But I had mentioned to him before, as I was animating it, I was like, there's like a music element to it that seems like if we overdo it, it could be very cheesy, and so I really want the sound design to mix with the music. I don't want it to be like a layer of sound design and then a layer and then a music track on top. Like, just please integrate these things. So he did an extremely really good job. He created like the perfect ambience, I think, for like the sense of longing, that the film needed to come alive. And unfortunately, he passed away this year. And so this is the last thing we're able to work on. And I dedicate the film in his memory because he really did bring it to life. Otherwise, if you watch it without sound, it does not have the same resonance as the music actually gives it. It brings it to life, you know?
I agree. It's a really wonderful three-dimensional piece, oddly, for some kind of small drawings. I'm very sad to hear that. I didn't know.
Oh, it's okay. I don't, yeah, it's dull hope. I mean, the writing's on the wall.
Yes. Well, fantastic. I'm so glad that you shared it with us, and I hope. Do you have other projects that you're working on now? Have you started your next 2-year?
Yes, I've been hand drawing a Nathaniel or an adaptation of a Nathaniel Hawthorne short story that will be done, a couple of years from now, maybe. And I shoot a lot of Super 8, so during the time of quarantine, the only times really go outside, you get to shoot the world as it's being seen right now. So that's sort of been an outlet, a creative outlet for me.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'll be interested to see what that turns into.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you much. And thank you to everyone who's watching.
And now we have with us Sebastian Rogers with Grandmother. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So first, I feel like I should start off by saying that I'm in Long Island City, which was once Canarsie territory, and so I'm grateful for the land that they I don't know how to say that they didn't leave to us, that we took from them, but that is I do know the tribe. So it's a beautiful film. And really, I think it's such a great way to spread this message, because one, it doesn't feel like we're being lectured, or anyone's being lectured. I said we, but it doesn't feel like anyone's being lectured or shamed. I think it's very inspirational and informative, but it really gets the point across. So well done with that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's down to Mark. I really wanted to make a movie that lectured and shamed us all, but eventually this long documentary that I was trying to make about Mark's, the retelling of American history, I never really managed to get to the funding place where I could make that documentary. But I had this one beautiful piece that I'd commissioned these wood block cuttings to go over. So I eventually was just like, I'm going to finish this one piece. And once I finished it, I realized I had something really special.
Yes.
And that's why I made it into its own film. So.
Well, it's great. Well, and the woodblocks are such an amazing piece of that. So that was always going to be on this section, even in a larger film. That was a part of the original idea.
Yeah, I kind of, when he was telling me that story, we were up on a hill overlooking the reservation, and I just immediately just saw the images, and so I kind of like preempted the art, getting in contact with the artist. You've got to help me, and then I didn't end up getting funding to finish the film, but I'd commissioned these wonderful pieces of art, and in the end I think it was worked out exactly as it should be, because as you say, and as he says in the story, it's just really important to get us to the table, or get us inviting the native voice to the table, basically.
At the very least, and I'm kind of jumping around in my notes, but we've only just it was last midterms that we even had our first Native congresswomen in Congress. And do you think that finally Natives and Indigenous people are being invited to the table? Obviously, we still have a lot of work to do, but do you see a movement at all happening?
I mean, I'm hopeful, but I'm a little skeptical. So I was just come back from a week in Houston, Texas, where I'm making a film about a guy called J.C. Elliott High Eagle. And he was the first Native American ever to graduate his university with a physics degree. He was the first Native American ever to get a job at NASA. He ended up writing the return plan for the Apollo 13 mission. He helped people land on the moon. He won medals. He wrote the legislation for the first ever Native American Awareness Week, and yet we've never even heard his name.
No, not at all. I was going to ask you if he is alive now, or if he's a.
Yeah, he's 78 years old, and I just spent a week with him documenting his story, and that's the film I'm hoping to make next. But But really, if you want to answer the question, why have we never heard of him? You just have to, the answer to that is really simple. Well, why is the lead character in Dances with Wolves a white man? And if you can work that out, you can work out why we've never heard of J.C. Elliott High Eagle.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. How did you wind up meeting up with Mark Charles to be able to tell the story? Is that part of research of the larger piece?
Well, no, a lot of the films I make are actually in service to, I run a non-profit organization called Peripheral Vision PDX, pvpdx.com, just check it out.
You don't have to be shy about that. Say it again.
pvpdx.com. So we're a non-profit and we make a media for organizations that otherwise couldn't afford it. And a lot of times those organizations are led by people of color. So there's a massive funding gap between organizations led by white people and those led by people of color. So I made a film in Chicago about a woman doing gang intervention work in Southside Chicago. And they were showing that at a conference in Philadelphia. And I went along to that conference. And someone, while I was there, just said, you know, you have these breakout sessions before the conference begins. And he said, you've got to go and listen to this guy speak. He's called Mark Charles. And I'd never heard of him. I went into the room and it was a 20-minute talk. And I must have wept for like 15 minutes of it. Literally, like I'd started kind of 5 minutes in, just hearing his perspective and the history of America and how he frames it. And afterwards I went up to him and said, like, I'm gonna make a film all about everything you said, you know. And he was just kind of like, okay. and then because the guy who'd sent me in to see him was a good friend of us both, and I think that helped. But then, I mean, the funny thing is that he, as he should be, deeply skeptical about a white filmmaker wanting to tell his stories for him. And when I was at the reservation, he wouldn't let me film anybody or anything. He was just like, you can come with me, you can film me, but I'm not having you exploit the images of the people here, because I've won their trust over years of visiting this reservation and living there. And so if you notice the beginning of the film, it opens up with like a picture of a cactus and some grass, and then it ends like there's a picture of a dog, and it actually worked out really beautifully in the end. I think it captures the landscape so wonderfully, but there's definitely this kind of like, I saw so much and my eyes were so alive in that time.
Yes.
But all the usual imagery you would have of life on the reservation is completely not in the film. You can see I'm like miles away on top of a hill filming, and and that's actually his respect for his people and the often kind of exploitation of their image, you know. So it was difficult as a filmmaker, but actually, you know, everything works out.
Yes, it really does. It's beautifully done. He talks early on about when he came there. So he has not lived on the reservation his whole life.
Well, his dad was a product of the enforced boarding school system, so in some ways robbed of his culture, and he was raised in the area this boarding school was. His mum was of Dutch heritage and his dad was Navajo, and so he felt quite removed, and he made the decision to move himself and his young family into the reservation. First he lived in the kind of border tension part of the reservation that we all know more about, which is the kind of trailer park kind of area, and then eventually moved to a hogan, like, you know, 13 miles away from running water, and where a massive amount of the reservation is completely like unknown and unvisited by most dominant culture people, because that front end where the reservation kind of edges onto the rest of the world, where you have the trailer parks and the kind of, that's a very small part of what the reservation really is. It's quite shocking when you go out and you see how remote people are living. So he went to live there. So I think in all he spent 10 years there before moving then to DC to pursue the idea of representing his people to the rest of the country.
That's fantastic. And is he, so he does speak, obviously, if you've met him at a conference, that's what he does primarily?
He does. He actually was he was an independent candidate in the 2020 election just recently.
Oh, really?
It was quite shocking, really. He said to me, I spoke to him during he was on the ballot in several states, but he said to me, you know, I've never felt more invisible than I feel now. He'd be appearing at an event for and the reporters would literally just miss off his name as if he wasn't even there. And during the primary, there was if you Google him, you can find articles that say that he was like lighting up the room. But I think because the way we work with the two-party system, we have so little belief in third-party candidates. But also, I think that he was really hoping to bring start a dialogue about a Truth and Conciliation Commission, because our country is the only one that hasn't had one. Even the Canadians have had a Truth and Reconciliation, they called it, but commission to look at the trauma. And if you look at the way our society is now, it's a society that hasn't dealt with the racial tensions that underpin our formation. And his argument is like, until you look at this stuff, until we have a shared history, until my history is the same as your history, we can't ever come together and make a difference. So he's trying hard.
I'm actually going to go now do some more research on him.
Amazing guy.
So that's fantastic. It's one last thing. What do you think that like the everyday person can do to say thank you? Like the people who, like, not the higher ups, not the government, not the people who are in charge, but what can the rest of us just do?
Well, we all have influence, and that's kind of partly what it means to have privilege. Is, for instance, I run an organization, and we do trainings and facilitate. I'm sure you have situations where you're on the board of something, or you're putting together a team of people to look at a certain issue or a certain thing, and it's making sure a place is kept at the table for a Native leader. It's really hard to get in touch with those people at this point. They're hugely marginalized, but that is our way of saying thank you. And really, any dialogue we have in America that doesn't include their voice is disingenuous. So I'd say that's the main thing you can do, is like look for inclusion of Native voices. And as much as I appreciate this whole BIPOC kind of era where we're kind of like classing all people of color, and in the same way as Irish and Italian people are all white, now all people of color, but there really is a depth of experience, and all those voices should be present. You can't say, oh, I have a Black woman and therefore I don't need a Native American, or I have a Native American so I don't need a voice of an Asian American. It's not right to just find a really quick way of saying all of them and then think that diversity is attended to by inviting one person of color into your board. That's just not true. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for one, sharing your film, and two, coming to talk. This has been really very enlightening. I really appreciate it.
Take care. Have a great festival.